I'm seeing it, man. Everybody wants a piece of the round. We got the patron request from Kristen. They say, I'm curious how equally matched Reiko and Arturia are. Not as servants, but as living people. I know both in their prime could destroy whole cities in an instant if they ever went all out. Had a number of OP weapons at their disposal and had a number of incredibly strong followers as well. My opinion is that they're both around the same level and any fight between them would just be a stalemate, assuming Arturia doesn't have Avalon. But I want to know your opinion on this. By the way, if you haven't already, make sure you guys sign up for the Patreon. You get access to early content and priority on your request. So getting back into the gauntlet, this is going to be more so in line with what Kristen wanted. This is more so going to be a dream matchup, and by dream matchup I mean they're going to be dream spirits that have access to their equipment across multiple classes. That way it gets that actual feel. I'm gonna bar Avalon because that's what they wanted, and this time around it's gonna take place in New York. We're gonna start off at the very top of Times Square Tower. It's nighttime, there's no people involved, there's no people in the city at all. It's just Reiko and Arturia. And when it comes to them being dream spirits, mana reserves isn't an issue, but they are thresholded to what their containers can allow. So at the rooftop, you have Arturia on one side of the building, and then you have Reiko on the other. Immediately after seeing each other, they both start to clash in the very middle. Arturia trying to get the upper hand by doing a series of swings. Reiko starts to retaliate, but instead of just swinging back at Arturia, she starts to put her focus into the ground beneath them. She channels her lightning into her sword and blasted a hole through the center of the entire building. Arturia didn't know this was coming up, so she starts to fall from the roof caving, falling straight down the middle. Reiko, being the one that initiated, was able to get back to safety. Then she pulls out her bow and starts to shoot a volley of arrows at Arturia while she's falling through the building. At the last second, she's able to use her invisible air to get off her strike air and blow all of these arrows out of the way in order to ignore any potential damage. She continues to fall down, and as she gets towards the bottom of the building around the 3rd floor, she uses invisible air again to propel herself onto the 3rd floor, runs to the other side of the room, and then dives out the window onto the New York streets. She turns back around to the building to see where Reiko is, and she looks up to notice that Reiko is dashing full speed down the side of the building. The moment that Arturia realized that she was coming, she had already reached her. Reiko uses that force behind her and clashes blades with Arturia, making her crater into the ground. She holds out for a few seconds, and eventually the ground just starts to cave, and they both fall into the New York sewers. Keep in mind, these sewers are very narrow. Everything is all in a straight line. Reiko decides to hop to this by thrusting her blade at Arturia multiple times in a row. Arturia is dodging them back and forth, and on Reiko's final hit, she follows this up with the knee towards her chest, which Arturia barely catches with her own knee and her elbow. She then switches off to her right leg and kicks Reiko across the pathway to create distance. Once Arturia starts to regain her footing between them, she looks up to realize that Reiko is already charging her noble phantasm, and right before she immediately lets it go, Arturia starts to slice the wall next to her and uses her mana burst to just barely escape the current that unfolded through the pathway that they were just in. Arturia realizes that this isn't the best location that she needs to be in, considering Reiko's skill and her power, so she slices through the ground and goes back up to the surface. Once she makes it back up, she decides to switch from her Excalibur over to Marmayados, because she realized from the clashes that she had with Reiko before that she wasn't going to overwhelm her in pure strength, and rightfully so. Reiko is known for being unrivaled in her generation, and while Arthur is also known for being an expert swordsman, they were never known for being the best among their kind. Now that Arturia has brought out Marmayados having better raw strength than Excalibur, is somewhat starting to even out the playing field. Reiko was only using one blade herself at the time. She takes heed of this, cycles back to her bow, and starts to shoot arrows at Artoria once again. But this also begins to work in Artoria's favor because, as we all know, we've seen her dodge reinforced bullets, so the arrows at this point were nothing to her. She shoots an arrow, Artoria weaves it. She shoots another, she dashes around another building. The smoke clears, Artoria catches the opening, and she speed blitz Reiko through multiple buildings on the other side. Once Artoria finally catches up to her, she uses her Marmayados to pick up an entire car that was nearby and toss it at Reiko while she was still recovering. But Reiko herself has amazing speed and she's still able to catch it right before it hits her. She pulls out her sword directly in front of her body and split the entire car in half, and both pieces just pass alongside her. Reiko decides that she might need to get a little more serious, so she begins to take off her armor, which is said to be what contains majority of her power. She then starts to transform into her spider variant, which the armor is used for to create the actual legs. She catches Artoria with one of the legs and then it ragdolls her straight into the ground in front of them. As Artoria starts to make her recovery, Reiko summons her other phantasm, her Ox Familiar, the same one that's stated to be city level. And up above, they start to see the leg manifest over the entire area around them. At this point, two things are happening at one time. Artoria is still fighting Reiko in her spider form, while the leg is about to drop down on top of her, and she's trying to find a way to separate herself from the two. As the leg finally comes crashing down into the nearby skyscrapers, Artoria uses her mana burst to get away from the both of them. There's lightning strikes coming down all around them. The wind is picking up the remains of the destroyed buildings, and all of this is spinning around in the area, acting as even more obstacles than there were before. The entire city is beginning to get destroyed. Artoria realizes that she doesn't have much time. She just barely manages to fend Reiko off and create distance, and she summons her VMAX, her motorcycle, and once again charges it with her mana burst. She revs up and goes straight up the side of a nearby skyscraper, all the way back up to the rooftop. While Reiko is fast, she does have the legs now, so this has somewhat slowed her down. She's trying to catch back up to Saber, but it's taking a little more time than usual. In those brief moments, Saber has already switched back to her Excalibur and she's charging up her blast to get rid of her phantasm, because what Reiko didn't know is that this is the perfect scenario for Artoria to actually unleash more of her seals. By the time Reiko finally gets back to the top, Artoria is letting go of her phantasm and completely obliterates Reiko's. Notably, this vaporizes all the buildings that fell on the other side of the phantasm. They're back at the rooftop. The city is in great ruin. Reiko has fatigue from using her phantasm, and Saber has some fatigue from using hers to get rid of it. From the shadows, in an area completely unrelated to them, a spirit has now been summoned by the world to address this situation. With the two of them both summoning these behemoth of phantasms, the world needed a person to stabilize, so it sent out an unknown spirit in order to do that. The spirit then starts to deconstruct the entire city of New York. The buildings start to lose their structure and completely melt into the earth's surface, and in its place, the entire territory starts to resemble an enormous castle. The spirit then vanishes back into the mist. Artoria and Reiko have no idea what's going on, but this doesn't stop anything that they have going. We switch back over to them, and they're already back trading blows with one another. Reiko has gotten rid of the legs in order to increase her speed, and she's also dual wielding in a similar fashion to her remnant variant. Now that Reiko has two swords instead of one, while Marmayados is extremely difficult to deal with, it's not nearly as bad as it was before. And remember, she still has greater physical strength than Artoria overall, so she uses this to create a gap and knocks Artoria into the air, charging her phantasm yet again. Only this time, she's able to get off her former half, where she reenacts the 4 heavenly kings, and Artoria is getting hit multiple times in a row before finally taking that electric current mid-air for her last hit, and Artoria falls back to the ground. This leaves her with some heavy damage. Reiko doesn't waste any time. She decides to take advantage of this while Artoria is still recovering, and she straight up stomps on Artoria's side. In that same moment, Reiko starts to get blindsided and knocked back from Artoria. She has no idea why. She looks up to realize that this was actually Artoria's steed that she had summoned to give her some extra time. Reiko starts to regain her focus on Artoria and realize that she's already gone. She looks around to her left and her right. She's still nowhere in sight. She turns around to her backside only to realize that she's already been hit by a true name release from Artoria's phantasm. Reiko begins to fall to the ground. The only thing that Artoria can hear from her side is laughter. Reiko is still an ascended spirit. She's way more durable as a spirit than you might think. Reiko once again takes advantage of this, speed blitzes Artoria, grabs her by the throat and slams her into the ground. She picks her up again. One thing that Reiko didn't realize is that canonically Artoria needs both of her hands in order to use Excalibur's phantasm. So she switches over to her Caliburn and releases her phantasm on the both of them that way, essentially as a kamikaze maneuver. This leads the both of them to go from a double KO.